For hundreds of years, the conviction of witchcraft was a very serious one. There were numerous trials and accusations of witchcraft that ravaged both England and, subsequently, New England between the 15th and 18th centuries, often resulting in permanent imprisonment or even death. Many of these trials reached a verdict on little more than eyewitness testimony. Stories that echo throughout the ages, like these Salem Witch Trials, have become forever ingrained in our history, though there is one tale of an accused witch that separates itself from the rest. The tale of Eunice Cole, the only person ever accused of witchcraft in the state of New Hampshire. Described on all accounts as an ill-tempered miscreant, she was supposedly imbued with magical powers, which led to many unfortunate turns in her life. Nowadays, she is both feared and pitied, depending on who you ask. And despite not having graced this earth for nearly 350 years, she's managed to attain a minor cult status amongst witchcraft and occult enthusiasts. Though some details remain muddled, let's take a deeper dive into what Eunice Cole really was. Her story began in England. Born sometime between 1590 and 1600, she grew up as a commoner just outside the walled city of London. Not much is known of her childhood, and her recorded history begins in 1635, when she married her husband. Before becoming Eunice Cole, she worked as a maid named Eunice Giles. She married a sawyer named William Cole at the medieval Anglican church of St. Dunstan's in Stepney, England. Not long after, the couple sailed for the Americas in search of new opportunities. They arrived just south of Boston in 1636, where they resided until they were among the first settlers of Exeter, New Hampshire, in early 1638. William Cole was granted land in Hampton, New Hampshire, and the couple moved to what would be their long-standing home in 1644. And this is where Eunice's problems and run-ins with the law would arise almost immediately. Long before her initial trials for witchcraft, she had several infractions which were vaguely stated as bad relations with her neighbors. Whatever the details may have been, the infractions were apparently serious enough to fine her, set her in stocks, admonish and even whip her. After receiving punishment, Eunice's animosity towards her neighbors and overall community continued to fester. Her mutual distaste with the entirety of Hampton reached a boiling point in 1656, when she was first put on trial for witchcraft. Preceding the trial, Eunice was again whipped because she was believed to be involved with the death of a deformed child. During the whipping, onlookers were said to have noticed several witch marks on her body, which led to the engagement of a formal hearing. Eunice was carted to Boston, where she would stand accused of witchcraft for the first time. With 26 witnesses testifying against her, many new charges arose during the trial, including her alleged implication with the death of a bedridden man, her murder of cattle through demonic means, and she supposedly had uncanny knowledge of a private conversation that she was nowhere near. Eunice managed to dodge the very serious witchcraft accusation, but was still detained on lesser charges. She was kept in the Boston prison until early 1660. When she was released years later, she returned home and immediately found herself in trouble again. Her distaste for those in her community had reached new limits, and upon her return to Hampton, she was arrested for calling her neighbors despicable names. She was once again whipped and sent back to prison. 2 years later, in 1662, her husband William died. Eunice petitioned the court for a release, which she was granted on a conditional basis. Not long after, she was once again accused and arrested. Her accusers claimed that they had observed her in her home speaking with the devil himself. As a result, she returned to a prison cell for another 8 long years. Because witches weren't entitled to own property, the local government seized her home and assets. Eunice became a ward of the town, and they paid a yearly charge to keep her incarcerated. When her sentence was eventually up, she was over 70 and homeless. The town begrudgingly put her in a cottage and supplied her with food and wood. Although her closest neighbors were tasked with making sure she received basic necessities, they would often ignore her and leave her to her own devices. Everyone in Hampton at this point believed Eunice Cole was a witch and nothing but trouble. She was intensely persecuted by anyone she came into contact with. Once again in 1673, many accusations were made about Eunice that led to her receiving a new trial for witchcraft. It was said that she was disturbing local pups and making them whine incessantly, that she had threatened the night watchmen, and that she had enticed children with nefarious intentions. She was carted to Boston where prosecutors would throw the proverbial book at her, bringing up instances that were decades old at this point to reach a conviction. Despite their best attempts to paint her as a monster, the jury stubbornly refused to find her legally guilty. Eunice once again returned to Hampton. Not much was heard from her until 1680. She was accused of being a witch one final time. She was apprehended and locked in leg irons in the local prison. 1 month later, she died and her legend was born. Local men at the time dug a shallow grave close to her shack. They drove a stake through her heart to ensure the witch would be unable to haunt them, and buried her unceremoniously. Some believe that the stake had missed its mark because strange happenings in Hampton had been attributed to the ghost of Eunice Goody Cole for hundreds of years. One particular incident occurred very soon after her death. During an outing attended by a large group of Hamptonites, a boat capsized when a sudden squall came up from seemingly nowhere. The entire party drowned even though they were within easy swimming distance of land. All of the grief-stricken onlookers were sure that Goody Cole had caused the accident to repay the townspeople for the treatment that she had received during her life. For many years afterward, almost every tragedy in Hampton was credited to the vengeful spirit of Goody Cole. Local historians and poem writers made sure that her memory stayed alive, as tales of her misdeeds passed down through the centuries. Everything from shipwrecks to tragic accidents reminded locals that the Witch of Hampton may still be present and meddling with their affairs. And during the Great Depression, America had a reinvigorated interest in the lives and sufferings of ordinary people. It was during this time that Eunice Cole's life story became an object lesson in injustice, and her tale skyrocketed to international fame. As a result, in 1937, the Goody Cole Society was formed to restore her citizenship that she had been deprived of during her imprisonment. At a town meeting in 1938, residents of Hampton voted to give her back her rightful place as a citizen. Cropping up around this time were reports that a strangely quiet, gray-clad little old woman had been seen roaming the older sections of town. This generated little interest until a police officer, visibly shaken, reported to his superiors that he had encountered a woman with that exact description walking along a poorly lit street. When he had stopped his cruiser to warn her that it was a dangerous area, she replied by telling him that she had walked the same street for hundreds of years, and that she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. The officer drove for a minute before registering the entirety of what she had said, and when he backed up to where he had spoken to her for clarification, she had already vanished. Throughout even the recent decades, there had been multiple sightings of what people believed to be Goody Cole's spirit still walking the Hampton streets. Many accounts frame her as being quite pleasant when she is interacted with. Some say that she has even taken a liking to our modern era, and has outfitted herself with contemporary clothing, so she can be much harder to pick out of a crowd. What do you believe? Was witchcraft ever a legitimate claim? Or was it just an easy scapegoat to get rid of the people you didn't like? Is it possible that Goody Cole's spirit still remains and wanders these streets of Hampton? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching, and make sure to tune in to next week for another mystery.